Hello everybody, this is ManuS and welcome to another Eternal Top Decks video series. So after we had our first deck tech with Dead Reckoning the other day, it's time to dive into more decks with the new cards. Today we're gonna talk about a deck that people probably have tried to make work since the inception of Eternal, and most of the time it just fell short and wasn't quite a real deck, but I think it finally is a real deck due to some recent changes, some sort of newfound technology, and to some extent also due to new cards, but not as much as one would think. Hooru Control. So let's dive right into the deck. Alright, so this is the deck. It is a very straightforward, typical control deck that people might know from games like Magic if they played Magic. This is basically your typical blue-white control deck in Magic. It's just a bunch of removal, sweepers, card draw, and some cards that help you deal with problems while also doubling as a way to eventually beat the opponent. So most of the cards for this deck have been around for quite some time, but I think changes in the metagame, realizations in deck building and of certain cards and stuff have helped the deck a lot. Hailstorm also helped, but not to a point where Hailstorm is the only thing that makes the deck a deck, because I'm not even running 4, as you can see. So let's take a look. The removal suit, we have 3 Lightning Strike. This card is really good right now. Deals with most early game units, like almost all the 1, 2, 3 drops and a bunch of 4 drops, especially the charge units. Like almost all the charge units in the game die to it, other than like Icaria. It also happens to double as an answer to most relic weapons, including a Daisho if it's unbuffed and they don't have additional armor, which is very, very important. If I could fit 4, I wouldn't mind running 4, but I had to shave the 4s to fit another card, so I only have 3 main deck, but it's fine, like the deck doesn't necessarily need the 4s. Then we have for Vanquish, that's just your go-to cheap answer to all the threats that are a particularly big lock, which is very important, and also you need answers to these big units so you don't have to always just harsh rule them. Then we have 3 Eilyn's Choice, additional anti-charge unit answer for the bigger charge units, helps to deal with some of the big problematic spells like Channel the Tempest or Rise to the Challenge, for example, to name 2 of the biggest targets, but also some of the random 4-cost removal like In Cold Blood or a Swindle or a Smuggler's Stash. These cards don't happen that often anymore, but they might still happen. An Obliterate, and it also just is a 3-cost answer to big units that have 4 or more attack. It actually has the upside that it can kill some units Vanquish can't. Like for example, if the opponent has double Unseen Commando, Vanquish can't touch them, but Eilyn's Choice can kill one. Eilyn's Choice also happens to kill a Champion of Glory or in a Whirling Duo if a Commando is out that still blanks your Vanquish, but you can Eilyn's Choice them. So there are legitimate upsides to Vanquish. It also has the upside of dealing with chargers or dealing with a unit plus a weapon that Vanquish couldn't. Like for example, if they Hammer of Might or Plate up a unit, you can just choice it before they ever deal damage to you. Well, with Vanquish you always take 1 hit. Then we have Eye of Winter, which is sort of also a removal. I started at 1, went up to 2, both because it's your best answer to deal with cards like Magto and Dawnwalker, and also the best way to do that, because Enforcer is just a pretty low impact card that turns cards like Torch and stuff into much more efficient cards than they should be against a deck like this. This also happens to double as like a late game pseudo card advantage engine, because it forces the opponent to always at least be like 2 for 1 by a harsh rule, even if they would just have enough pressure with 1 threat. and locks down whatever they have left and buys you a lot of time to find real answers, and then they play the next threat, you can Eye of Winter it again. It on an empty board, it's always an answer in the back pocket to most units, so they always need like 2 threats to even start pressuring you, which has proven pretty effective. Then we have Hailstorm. The card is really good. The problem is these days with Lightning Storm is that it is very situational and not universally good against most decks. Like, it's universally best against Skycrack, because that's the only deck that basically exclusively runs 2 health units without Warcry buffs or weapons. And most other decks have a mix of cards that die to Lightning Storm and have 3 or more health. So Hailstorm is really good because it provides you with a way to just sweep all the almost all the units that you can't can't vanquish, and also buys you time to get to harsh rule, and against a fair share of decks it's a better harsh rule because it's just a cheaper card, but still kills all of the things. So the card is definitely a big improvement to the early and mid game of the deck. Then we have 3 Auric Runehammer. It's just another very universal card. It lets you deal with all the units that Lightning Strike deals with. You can team up with Hailstorm in some spots to kill even big units like World Bearer Behemoth. These things matter more than you might think, so it's not something to just be like, oh yeah, that's niche or whatever, because being able to like double team narrow like situational cards to still get use out of them is pretty important actually. And especially if you like, for example, kill a smaller unit with the first hammer hit, then they play a big unit, and the turn after you just Hailstorm plus Runehammer to get to upgrade your Hailstorm into a deal 7, for example, with the second half of the hammer. So you still get like a 1-for-1 out of the Hailstorm and out of the hammer. And the other thing is, hammer is a good answer against opposing relic weapons, in addition to Lightning Strike, especially if they have Phase Aegis and Strike doesn't do it. It's also actually a threat. Like, it often comes the stage in the game where the opponent just ran out of cards, you pulled ahead, taken control of the game, and then you just slap down a hammer and hit the opponent for 4 a turn until they die, or until you get them low enough to finish them off with a channel to the face or something like that. Or just like double pressure them with a hammer and a Warden. So this is actually pretty important that it's also a threat in the deck. Then we have 4 harsh rule, pretty self-explanatory, just the sweeper and centerpiece of the deck, especially against more mid-rangey decks. This is super important. Like, basically the mid-range decks often come down to whether or not you draw a harsh rule early enough. And last but not least, if you want to count it as removal, you have channel. It's pretty good that your big advantage play as an 8-drop does like triple duty as a win condition, as a removal, and as a like card draw engine. So this is the card that makes the deck possible and as strong as it is, because that's the card where the winning usually starts. Then we have 2 units, Shelterwing Rider and Throne Warden, and I think actually the like realization of how good Shelterwing Rider is since it got buffed, and trying it in a lot of decks, is a big part of why the deck is as good as it is now, together with Hailstorm. But the sort of the technology of Shelterwing Rider is a really big part of it, because the point with Shelterwing Rider is, first of all, it makes the opponent spend a card on it, and even after they spend a card on it, you still have an 0-5 flying blocker, which is really good in a control deck, especially in a control deck with sweepers, because it makes it even harder for the opponent to not overextend into your sweepers. You just play a Rider, and they need to play into your Hailstorms and harsh rules to pressure you enough through the Shelterwing Rider and the Eye of Winter, and then you can just Hailstorm and even keep the Rider to blank the next thing they play after, or harsh rule to reset the board. And at the same time, they still usually spend a card or half a card on the Rider to pop the Aegis to even be attacking, because otherwise the Rider would eat one of their units each turn. And in other scenarios on empty boards, especially against like time decks, for example, that don't have a lot of ways to actually break the Aegis on this is a really good threat. I've beaten down people with this. Like, you just play it on turn 4, vanquish the Titan, they don't have a way to pop the Aegis, and you just hit them for 5 a turn, and suddenly they are so low that they just can't even like go for the late game anymore and just die to channels, weapons, and Shelterwing riders. So the card does so many things for the deck, it's amazing. I started becoming really impressed with the card and liking the card when I started playing it more and more in decks like the Blade deck and some other stuff before, and it has quickly grown into one of my favorite cards in the game right now. Card is so powerful, so versatile, and it is easily the best Hooru card in the game right now. And then we have Throne Warden. The card helps make your hammers a bit better, but that's not that big of a deal. The important part is that it's a pretty good blocker with the Aegis, a 4/4 Aegis blocker. Locks down all the smaller units, once again forcing them to overextend into your harsh rolls and hailstorms, and buying you a lot of time, and also gaining 4 health is really good in a control deck, because more health equals more time to take control of the game, and the armor obviously works really well with the 2 Staff of Stories that I'll talk about in a moment to make them particularly durable. So yeah, Throne Warden, and also happens to be a decent threat against other like unit light decks, for example, because unless they have like Auric Runehammers or something, the card is actually really annoying to deal with and is like a 2.5 for 1 or something a lot of the time if they have to spend like 2 cards dealing with it, and you still gain the 4 armor and get some value out of those. So the card can do some tremendous work against a lot of decks. Okay, so then last we basically have the card draw, the card advantage engines. This is just basically card filtering, card selection, since the card doesn't get you any card advantage, but it gets you some virtual card advantage by putting away cards that are dead in the matchup or useless right now, or if you already have more power than you need, you can put away power, but you don't do that often outside of the very late game. But like in the first 10 plus turns, you almost never put power away, because you basically want to find power with this, because you really want to have 8 power by turn 8. Then we have Wisdom of the Elders, basically the oil that makes the engine run smoothly in these types of decks, because you need to get ahead on cards, even if it's only by 1 card, to be able to make all the power drops up to 8 and still have enough business to interact with your opponent. That's why these subtle draw 2s like Wisdom of the Elders are extremely important and essential to the early and mid game of decks like this to hit your power drops and find your interaction on time. And the card is as innocuous as it is important. Privilege of Rank is basically a lesser Wisdom of the Elders, but still really good in this type of deck, because, like I said, Wisdom of the Elders is especially important to find your power drops and hit your power drops on time, and Privilege of Rank guarantees your next 2 power drops. On the downside, while it is much better at guaranteeing your power drops, it also doesn't help you find answers if answers are what you need and power is what you have. But it is extremely good at the job it's doing, while Wisdom is just more flexible at what it's doing, but yeah, if you need power, you might still not find any, while Privilege always gets it for you. And yeah, it's also obviously a part of the power base, because otherwise the deck would only have like 29 power. The power is already like a bit low, but thanks to Privilege and Wisdom and Strategize, the power base works okay as it is. Card is really good. Like, don't underestimate this. This card is really important. Like, also don't consider replacing this with like Waystones or Favors or whatever. The card is the real deal. It's like the best thing for the slot. You really need these 2 powers, because how else do you expect to hit 8 power for your Channel the Tempest realistically, consistently, and on time? And the last puzzle piece is Staff of Stories. The card has fallen out of favor for a long time, since it got nerfed from 5 armor to 4, but this is the deck that makes the best use of it. I initially started with 1, sort of as like an advantage engine and pseudo win condition, because a win condition that also helps me find answers and stay in the game, as well as win the game when the opponent isn't applying pressure, is perfect. Yeah, Throne Warden, best friend of Staff of Stories, because it protects it and ups the armor to 8, so it's really, really hard to kill with damage for the opponent with relic weapons or burn, so they really need units. And the deck is really good at preventing the enemy from doing that with units between Shelterwing, Rider, Warden, and all the removal. And yeah, the card has been doing a tremendous job at just closing the door on the opponent in the late game and just pulling ahead. Like, Channel puts you ahead enough to take control, but it's usually not enough to pull ahead enough to just win, straight out win, because the opponent can still like kind of draw out of that. But if you take temporary control with the card advantage from a channel and then drop a staff, that's where the game is over. Like, the opponent cannot beat like the advantage of a channel followed by a staff that you can then protect, and then they just lose. That's why I went up to 2 staff, because I otherwise felt like I'm losing too often in the late game, especially against the more grindy time mid-range decks and stuff, and their Dawnwalkers and so on, that force you to waste cards on them. But yeah, the second staff did it. Now the deck feels like it's very consistently capable of just outgrinding, outlasting, and winning in the late game against almost everything. Card is really, really good in the deck. Also, there's a minor upside that shouldn't be underestimated. In the best case, the card wins you the game, but in the worst case, the card is still a 5-cost gain 4, which is not great. Like, you wouldn't put a 5-cost gain 4 in your deck, but there are situations where a 5-cost gain 4 is what you need to survive another turn, or not be burned out, and getting that out of your win condition and your card draw spell on top of all that is a really nice bonus. So when you're really under pressure, or when you're like at a point where you might die to an Obliterate or a Torch, Staff of Stories plus 4 armor can just save your ass just from the armor, not counting the fact that it also draws you cards. So that's a really nice and surprisingly relevant upside sometimes, especially against aggressive decks with reach. And yeah, then we have the power base, 25 power, 8 sigils, only 3 primal sigils for the Seeks, but it's fine. Sure, we need 4 for channel, but it's very, very unlikely that by the time you have 8 power, that the only primal you saw are your 3 primal sigils, and then you have a Seek power that would find you the force, and you can't. Because the deck has enough primal to usually see at least 1 primal, and then you have the Seeks to get the other 3, so it's not really, doesn't really matter. And the Waystones are so good that you definitely want 4, they're very important. These Waystones are not very good or very important, but they're decent in the deck since we have Runehammer and especially Staff of Stories, plus gaining a health from a Justice Sigil is nice, but I still want 5 Justice Sigil with 2 Privilege of Rank to make sure they get me enough power, because you really want them to find power at all stages in the game. So make sure that you only seek power for Justice Sigil if necessary, and if you want to put power on the bottom with Strategize, put Justice Sigils on the bottom if you can, because they keep your privileges alive longer. It's a nice thing that comes up in the late game sometimes. You have like 1 Justice Sigil left in the deck and 1 in hand, you Strategize, you just put the second on the bottom, and then you privilege both into your hand. That's a line that you should keep in mind. And yeah, this is basically better than gain 1 health in this deck, so it's nice. And in the sideboard it sometimes also matters for like Sword of the Sky King or whatever. Then we have the 8 duels. This is basically a bad Crest in the deck. Sure, we have 8 units, but most of the time it's just a depleted Hooru duel. Worse Crest, but we don't have Crest, and even if we had Crest, we still would probably want the banners. Speaking of Crests, there are like 3 Crests. 1 Justice. I recently cut the 3rd Waystone to fit another Crest, because 3 is fine. Maybe even 4 works. I couldn't blame anyone for cutting like another Emerald Waystone for Crest of Vengeance. I like taking the Shadow Crests here, simply because there is the Fallenport unitless control deck, so the opponents might mistake you for this, or they might expect you to splash certain cards, while I think there's less upside of just putting like Crest of Wisdom or Crest of Skycrack as Crest of Fury in your deck, for example. But I mean, I guess Crest of Fury also works. The problem is you don't have consistency then, because it's the only crests where you have both in the same color. Like if you go for the Fury or Wisdom crest here, as soon as they see the Crest of Vengeance, kind of destroys the illusion. But sure, you can play Wisdom, so they might mistake you for Temporal or Chalice, and you could take Fury, so they mistake you for like Icaria Blue or something. but given that we have Shadow Crests in both colors, I went for the Shadow ones, and because there's the unitless control deck. But yeah, doesn't really matter in the end. And yeah, 2 Crests of Cunning. That's the most I could afford by going down to 3 Primal Sigils without having too much Primal in the deck. So yeah, the only change I can really see if you want more Crests is reducing Emerald Waystone for more Crest of Vengeance. But 3 is probably fine. You also don't want to like risk the smoothness of your power drops too much, because then you might lose because you have depleted power when you need to Harsh Rule or Hailstorm or whatever. And we also have Seek Power and Privilege as very slow power sources and the Hooru banners, so you don't want to go overboard on those. But Crests have their uses. Alright, that's the deck list. Deck has been doing pretty well for me. I think I'm currently 23-12 over 35 games. My first 14 games I went like 12-2 on stream. I also like uploaded a stream highlight for that, where you can see where I built and tuned the list a bit and tested it on stream for the first 14 games. If you want to see some more footage and some more like background on my thought process and brewing and tuning process of the deck. And yeah, as usual, we're gonna hop into some games, show it in action. 6 games on ladder to give you some idea of how it's positioned, how it's doing right now, and how to pilot it and how it plays out. Alright. Don't go anywhere. Games are around the corner. Stay tuned.